Today's video is going to be something a little different. It's going to be working on the 1954 Ferguson 20 diesel tractor that I've had for a few years and put a lot of work into. So what we have is we've a bit of a diesel leak through the pull to stop shaft here. And it's dripping on the, not really dripping, it's hanging around in there a little bit. So I'm going to take off this governor diaphragm casing. I'm going to take off this and I'm going to have a look in. So there's diesel getting from in there into there. So let's start stripping this down. That's the governor housing off. So to take out the diaphragm now. A lot of people end up damaging these, but if you look there near the tread there for the bolt, there's a little hole in there and you can get something in behind to help pull it forward without damaging, because this is leather and you don't want to tear that at all. So I've just been running it and adjusting the revs by hand with the rack, and the only place that I can see that diesel is coming out of is if you look around the rack there, there's a threaded sort of I don't know what would you call it, tube there, that there's no actual seal between that and the rack. Now that hole there on the left that goes into the pump itself, that does allow an overflow of oil back in this way, and I'm half thinking of blocking it, because at least when things get too high here level wise you can let it out the drain, but when things get too high for this, it starts coming in here, starts soaking up your diaphragm and making it a little less sensitive to the engine revs. So I might just look and see if I have a bung, even something that mightn't seal 100% but just might stop a bit of splash even coming in here, because when I took this off there was a lot of diesel. It was actually leaking out through there on the inside, so that's the height of the level of diesel. That was definitely affecting the diaphragm. So that's what I'm going to do, is look for a little bung to push into that hole. I had to run in there for about 5 minutes. I couldn't really see any diesel leaking in from there. I'd say what happened was, because this engine has the lift pump, this does pressurize the fuel system up to about 5 pounds per square inch. And even though there's new elements in this pump and new plungers, there is going to be pressure downwards through those elements and into the crankcase of this pump, and it eventually will, because it is diesel lubricated in the plungers anyway, it will mix with the oil and will lift. So I think the best thing is to try and plug that even slightly, just to stop a bit of splashing here. We don't want diesel coming in here and affecting our diaphragm, because this is soaking wet and this has to be able to work on a vacuum. And if it's going to be oil and diesel holding that back from doing what it's meant to do, you are going to, the engine isn't going to be governed as good as it should be. So let's go and have a look for a little bung for that hole. So I'm after coming up with this little bung. So I'm going to fit the diaphragm on it. It doesn't seem to be getting in the way of the pull to stop lever, and that is the brass lever, hook shaped lever there, and that pulls this rack backwards. So I'm going to put on the diaphragm onto here and make sure that this isn't affecting its range of motion. Now, once you press the maximum fuel or excess fuel button, this is as far forward as this rack is going to actually go. So there's a good bit of space behind this little shaft here. In fact, there's more space between it than there is between it and that brass pull to stop lever, so it shouldn't be any problem. So now we'll see that make a difference. It'll take a while, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drain out any excess diesel and oil that does build up there, and we'll keep an eye at that, make sure it's staying nice and dry. But it's no big deal, it's just I do want to keep the diaphragm. I notice that the governor on this is a bit lazy, so I do want to try and keep it in good condition, good working condition. Another thing I want to do now that I have this tractor here is I've taken out this rubber bung here on the regulator, and this side is for adjusting the maximum charge. So I noticed earlier on that this ammeter wasn't moving a whole lot. I'd like to see it move a bit more, but more importantly I'd like to keep an eye on the battery voltage. In other words, what is charging. Amps is current, I'm not too fussed about that. If the battery is in a good state of charge, it's not going to go throwing out much. So I'm more interested in voltage. So I'm going to start it. Excuse the noise. I have got the multimeter hitched up to a good earth, the actual battery lead, the earth, and I have the positive side connected to a terminal from the regulator. A is for ammeter, so that's basically your battery charge. So that is basically going straight coming straight from the regulator, and then this wire is going straight back to the battery. So we'll give it a start and give it a bit of a rev. So I don't know how loud this is going to be, but it's not going to be quiet anyway. So ticking over, we shouldn't see any discharge. So I'm going to just give it a quick rev till it charges a little bit. I'm going to put it back to tick over and make sure that that cut out, in other words, this screw is adjusted right. So it should not discharge. We're charging, ticking over. And we're not seeing a discharge. In other words, it's not going down to 12.31. So now I'm going to give it a rev. We've no discharge, so that is, so I'm just going to give it another little tighten up, just to give it another little. Okay, so that's just charging that a little bit more there. I do remember turning the charge down a bit because I do remember seeing it going up towards 15 amps. It is only a 10 amp system, so that does make sense. But I really sometimes don't understand why they have amps. If it was voltage, it would be a lot better, I think, because as your battery gets very charged, when it's at full state of charge, you know, you have to rev it an awful lot for it even to go the width of the needle. Whereas if that was voltage, it's always going to be putting out at least 12. You'd be getting a positive reading, and you'd know if your charging system is in good nick. So I'm going to disconnect all this now and put that little rubber bung back in there, keep the dampness out of them points.